my name is Natalie, and this is Beth.
Hi.
We're both zookeepers here in our outreach department. And we're here at the Toronto Zoo where our mission is to connect people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. So today we are here in our education classroom. So this is where we have a lot of school groups and camps, and our zoo school come in and they can have an educational experience here. And these are some of our ambassador animals. So these guys take part in a lot of our education programs, and we can bring them out and people can get a nice up close and personal experience with a lot of our reptiles here. So this is McFly. He's an eastern fox snake. And right now I am just putting him on this pegboard or this exercise tree. So sometimes we do like to bring them out and we can put them on here and let him kind of explore, get some exercise, move his body around, and you really get to see how he can slither around and hold on to the branches like he would in the wild. So these snakes, this is an Ontario snake. They are endangered in Ontario. There's two different populations. There are one population that lives kind of down along Lake Erie and another population that lives up along Georgian Bay. So they are a threatened species here, and you can see that this snake does kind of look similar to our Massasauga rattlesnake. So Massasauga rattlesnakes are the only venomous species that we have here in Ontario. So they've got a similar color pattern. They live in similar areas to the Massasauga rattlesnake. But you can see, if you want to close in on his tail, he doesn't have that rattle. So he is not a rattlesnake, but he has learned how to mimic rattlesnakes to scare away predators. So what he will do is he'll put that tail in the grass or in leaves and kind of vibrate it, rattle it around, and it will make kind of a buzzing sound, which sounds similar to a rattlesnake. So that can scare off predators, but unfortunately it also scares a lot of people. So unfortunately, a lot of people will actively try to hunt these guys thinking that they're a venomous snake, but really there is no reason to be afraid of them. They are more afraid of us than we are of them, and that's true with the Massasauga rattlesnakes as well. As long as we just give them their space, they really are happy to just do their own thing and not come near us. A lot of people do interact with these guys. They find them a lot of the time on the roadways. They'll come out onto the hot pavement to bask in the sun and get nice and warm, and so yeah, a lot of the time they do end up on the roads, unfortunately, as well. And these are, the eastern fox snake is Ontario's second largest snake. So when he's all spread out, you can see he's quite long. He can get to be about 4 to 6 feet in length. This guy's still a little young, so he still has some growing to do, but yeah, they're one of our longest snakes that we have.
And what's the longest snake in Ontario, Natalie?
The longest snake that we have is the black rat snake.
So you guys might have met one of our black rat snakes in a previous Facebook Live in our Americas Pavilion. So just to compare, if you did get a chance to see that, if not, you can head back and take a look on a previous post on Facebook, but you can see one of our other native species. We do have a black rat snake here in our education portable as well. However, she recently ate, so we don't want to handle her right now. I do have here with me one of our other ambassador animals. So this is David Boa. He is a Hog Island boa constrictor. So they are beautiful snakes. I love having them in our collection here. And if you get a nice look at his face there, they're very pretty. Unfortunately, that is one of the reasons why these guys are threatened in the wild. The Hog Islands are a series of islands off the coast of Honduras, and that is the only place these snakes are found in the wild. And unlike many other boa constrictor species, these guys actually stay quite small. It's possible for females to reach around 12 feet, but usually it's not typical for them to get that large, typically around 6 or 8 feet. This is a male, so he does stay a little bit smaller as well. And because of their small size, they're very docile in nature, and also their lighter pattern. They're much lighter than their relatives that are found on the mainlands of Central and South America. All of these reasons have caused them to be very desired for the pet trade. A lot of people want to have these as pets, and I can see why. They are beautiful animals. but unfortunately this has caused them to be hunted in the wild quite extensively. So their population in the wild was almost completely wiped out, but thankfully people realized this and put in protections in order to prevent that from happening. So one of the things that was mentioned earlier in our other snake talk was the pet trade, and if you are interested in getting any of these animals as pets, always make sure that you are going through the proper channels and making sure that you do your research and know where those animals are coming from. A lot of facilities do breed these snakes, and then you can't have them as pets, the ones that are born under these circumstances. You just want to make sure that they're not being taken from the wild. Thankfully, their wild populations are doing much better now since the protections have been put in place. And they're one of those, thankfully, success stories. But obviously, we still need to keep doing what we can to protect these and other pretty incredible animals. Now, we're going to put David here on our climbing tree as well, see if he wants to climb around. One of the things I like to point out is just a lot of the differences between our different types of snakes. So you saw that McFly there, the fox snake, is a much a much skinnier snake, and they move around a little bit differently. So you can see David is holding on quite nicely to my hand, so I'm just going to kind of let him do his thing if he wants to climb around. I'm not going to try to force him too much. But these snakes are very good climbers, especially as juveniles. They're much more likely to be up in the trees. As adults, they spend a bit more time on the ground, but still very, very good at climbing. So you can see him using all of those muscles along his body to just pull himself along these nice branches. And the neat thing about most snakes actually is that they don't even need to have this long branch in order to climb. They would be able to climb up a tree trunk even without having those really obvious holds. They're able to just use the muscles of their entire body with a lot of different techniques, either wrapping all the way around the tree trunk or creating kind of an S curve like you see here and gripping onto the trees in that way. And they're able to move around quite well. And if you want to maybe come around and get a nice close look at his face there. Like our other snakes and all the snakes that we have here in the outreach area, these guys are constrictors, so they are not venomous. But you hear a lot of different myths about venomous snakes. Some people think that if they have those kind of cat-like eyes, that means that they're venomous. But this is not true. As you can see, these guys do have those beautiful eyes, but they kind of look like they have those narrow pupils, almost like a cat. But that does not mean that they are venomous, because we would not be handling our venomous snakes this close with the public for sure. So just one of those little myths that we like to make sure that people kind of have an understanding of. Another interesting thing is the concept of venomous. A lot of people will call venomous snakes poisonous, but there is a bit of a difference there. For something to be poisonous, you do have to ingest it, whereas the venom of a snake is injected into the animal that it is trying to eat. So a venomous snake is not necessarily poisonous, and those two things do have different meanings. But like I said, these guys are constrictors, so they would be using their whole bodies to wrap around their prey and to kill the food that they are eating. And that would be anything from small mammals to quite large mammals, actually, compared to their body size. Typically, they can swallow anything that's about as large as the widest part of their body, and sometimes even larger. And they can, if you compare the size of their head to the size of that part of the wider parts of their body, it's quite fascinating to imagine them swallowing something like that, because they don't chew up their food, they do swallow it whole. And they have very unique adaptations in their jaw and in their head structure to allow them to be able to do that. So it's very, very fascinating to see.
One thing we like to tell the kids when we're trying to explain how they can swallow whole prey items, we try to kind of give them something to relate it to. So we'll say, can you imagine being able to swallow a whole watermelon whole? So yeah, usually like that said, 3 to 4 times the size of their head or the thickest part of their body. So that's a nice way for them to try to imagine what it would be like to
Absolutely.
swallow something up.
I just see some questions about David here. He was born in 2013, So he is around 7 years old. So he's would be considered pretty much full grown, but definitely can continue to grow a little bit. Reptiles tend to grow throughout their entire lifetime. Their growth rate just slows quite a lot as they get older. We see Katie's asking if McFly and David eat the same food. They do eat similar types of food. So McFly, because he is a smaller snake, actually eats, we give him 2 mice when he is fed, and he's only fed once a week. Whereas David here gets 2 rats, and he's fed every 2 weeks. So because David's a bit of a bigger snake, he gets a bigger food item, and we tend to just go based on that for the most part. So all of our snakes get fed mice or rats typically, and yeah, just how much depends on the size of the snake. How long do they live? Another great question. Typically these snakes can live to be around 20 years, possibly a bit longer in zoos and other institutions where they are taken care of and they don't have to worry about predators and they've got their fancy vet care and food delivered to them on a regular basis. But yeah, around 20 would be pretty typical. So we're gonna let David hang out here on his little pegboard for a while, and Natalie has another animal for you guys to meet.
Yeah, so I have Phoenix. So she is a bearded dragon. These guys would be found in Australia, so they like a nice hot desert temperature. So we do have her set up in a desert-like terrarium with the appropriate sandy substrate that she can live on. She's got a nice heat lamp so she can climb up and bask and get up to a nice hot spot. But with all reptiles, when we're setting up their enclosures and their homes, we want to make sure that they have a temperature gradient so that it's not just too hot throughout the entire enclosure, that they have somewhere they can get to that's nice and hot, they can warm up, and also somewhere that they can go to cool down, because they do need to regulate their body temperature depending on their surrounding. So as long as she can get up somewhere nice and warm and then cool down away from the UV light, then she's happy. So Phoenix, like I said, she's a bearded dragon. These guys are omnivores, so she gets a variety of different food. She gets crickets, mealworms, superworms, and then she also gets lots of vegetables. So she gets salad, lots of leafy greens, carrots, stuff like that. So she gets quite a variety of vegetables every day, or not every day, every couple days. So she gets a variety of different things. One day she'll get crickets and insects, the next day she'll get her vegetables and her salad. And the reason these guys are called bearded dragons is because you can see that throat. When they're threatened, what they'll do is they'll puff that throat up and it'll turn a really dark brown or black color. So it kind of looks like a beard. So when they're threatened, that's what they'll do. They'll puff that up and make it look really big to scare away any predators, or they're also quite territorial. So if a male saw another male nearby, that's what they do. They puff that throat up, and they also can do a head bob. So that's another territorial display that they'll do. They'll bob their head, signaling to the other one that this is my space and back off. And the other bearded dragon, if it's more submissive, it will do a little wave with its arm, and that's kind of saying, okay, I'm backing down, I'm going away. So that's kind of how they can communicate with each other.
So we've got another little friend here, just a different type of lizard, and you can kind of compare the two of them. So this is Fran. She is a Euromastix. So Euromastix is kind of a more technical name for them, but the typical common name is a spiny-tailed lizard. So you can see those nice little pokey spines on her tail. That is definitely a defense mechanism for them. So if these guys are in the wild, they would be burrowing under rocks and that type of thing. And if they can't fit their whole body under there, they'll just leave that spiky tail for predators to see, because not many predators are going to want to try to attack that. Just like the bearded dragon has kind of spines all over its body, the Euromastix have evolved to just have the spines along their tail. I do think these guys have some of the cutest little faces. They kind of look like Godzilla, but they're very unique little guys. Euromastix are, there's a lot of different subspecies, so some of the others are much larger and much more colorful, These guys have just kind of a pretty dull gray color across their whole body. But yeah, if you look up the species, you can see a lot of different other types that have much brighter coloration.
I just saw a question asking what predators might go after these reptiles. So for the bearded dragon in Australia, things like dingoes and other birds of prey might come after them.
Yeah, it's really neat with the bearded dragons. They have what's often referred to as a vestigial eye. So they actually have a photosensitive scale on top of their head. So that means that they have the ability to sense just changes in light and dark, in shadows and that type of thing. So part of the thought there is that that can help them detect a predator that might be coming from above. So if a bird of prey is coming down, they might be able to notice that shadow or the changes in light as the bird is approaching, and then respond appropriately by usually running away.
And I saw somebody else ask what the bearded dragon's name was. So her name is Phoenix. So she came to us to the zoo. She was a donated pet that somebody decided that they didn't want anymore. And unfortunately, that does happen a lot of the time with lizards. People will get a reptile that they think they want as a pet, and they think it's going to be an easy pet, and they can be in a lot of ways, but you do have to have the proper setup, and you have to do your research and know what you're committing, because a lot of reptiles can live 10, 15, 20 years. So it is a lifelong commitment, and we just want to make sure that people know what they're getting into before they do get a reptile as a pet.
Especially with the bearded dragons, I find quite often in pet stores they are being sold as babies, so they're quite tiny. Sometimes, they're only a couple inches long. Maybe in the store they're about this big, and then you may have a setup expecting your little lizard to stay that small, but then they very quickly outgrow that small setup. It's important to do your research and know what you're getting into. Hi, Fran.
Somebody's saying they have a bearded dragon, and his favorite thing to do is watch television.
Yeah, they can make great pets for sure. And if you know what you're getting into and you have the appropriate space for them, they can be amazing companions. What do you think?
Yeah, the main thing with them is getting the proper setup. So it is quite a lot to set up, get the proper heat lamps, the UV lights, food. A lot of people don't. So like I said, bearded dragons eat insects and crickets. So a lot of people don't want crickets potentially getting loose in their house. So it's something to consider. Something like the Uromastic, which is more of a vegetarian and doesn't need insects, might be better if you don't want insects potentially getting out in your house. But yeah, there's lots to consider. So as long as you do your research and look into it before considering a reptile for a pet, they can make great pets.
One of the other things we were going to mention as well is that you might notice, if you want to take a look around the room, that we do have a bunch of different enclosures around here. So we've got a variety of reptiles that live in this space. And it doesn't look like the typical exhibit you might see in some of the pavilions where we have our other reptiles. So bearded dragons is a great example. We have bearded dragons on exhibit in the Australasia Pavilion, and they have a much different setup than these guys. And it's designed to look a little bit more like the environment that they would be in the wild. And part of the reason why we don't focus as much on the appearance of these tanks is just because these are our outreach animals. So this is a behind the scenes area that most people aren't seeing. But the messaging comes from when we are able to take the animals out of their exhibits and bring them out into the public, into the open spaces. People can come up close, ask questions, see them, touch them, all that type of thing. So we make sure that their homes here provide everything that they need, but it's not as focused on maybe mimicking the look of their natural environment, just mimicking the requirements and the necessary things that the animals would need to survive. So in case there's any questions on that, just wanted to touch base on that.
And I do see somebody asking where Fran comes from. So that was our Uromastic. So they come from North Africa. And that might have been an older question that maybe we didn't end up answering.
Do you have any other questions? You can take a look. Goliath is the other Hog Island boa that we have, but David is still just hanging out here on his little tree. He hasn't moved much, he's pretty happy. So you can see McFly hanging out in his exhibit. So the fox snakes are usually pretty active, so it's nice to see them moving around.
Oh, I see a question about them living outside in Canada. So the snakes like McFly, who would live here in Ontario, they will hibernate for the winter, and they will hibernate in something called a hibernacula. So a lot of the time they will go into crevices and rocks, and they'll huddle together with the rat snakes, it can be groups of up to 60 individuals all huddled together, and that they can keep warm for the winter and hibernate there.
I actually saw a small group of garter snakes hanging out on somebody's porch the other day. So I was very hopeful that those people were not afraid of snakes. So we do have one more of our ambassador animals to show you here. This is Gertie, and she is a ball python, also known as a royal python. So we've seen snakes from Ontario and from Central America, and these guys come from Africa. So we've got snakes all over the world. And Gertie is quite an impressive snake. She's very large for a ball python. But as she's getting close to the camera there, you might be able to see some of the really neat adaptations that these animals have. So you can kind of see along her lip there that she does have, well, no, she's getting camera shy. She actually has small little pits along her lip, on her upper lip, and those are heat pits. So those actually help her detect heat. So these snakes, as most people know, they use their tongues to sense their environment, kind of like smelling. They pick up little particles in the air, and then there's an organ in the roof of their mouth that allows them to detect what those particles are, and that helps them figure out what in their environment they might be able to find to eat. But some snakes, like these ball pythons, have the added advantage of having the ability to sense heat. So that way, if there is a mouse maybe hiding around under some leaf litter or something like that, they can't see it, but they can smell it with their tongue as well as sense the heat coming from that mammal, which is a pretty neat thing. I definitely wish I had that ability sometimes, but yeah, so just interesting to consider that a lot of different animals have senses very different than our own, and it can be sometimes challenging to even imagine what they might be experiencing or how they might be experiencing the world, because it can be so different than the way we do. And I think that's one of the things why people tend to be a bit nervous around snakes, because again, they are so different from us. They don't have any limbs. They are very different type of animals from what we are accustomed to with ourselves. So
If you want to show the spurs that
yeah.
Gertie has, her tail was out perfect just a second ago, but so right here you can see these little spurs. So that's on one on each side, and then they have a pelvis as well. So that's the remnants of what used to be limbs thousands and millions of years ago when they evolved from lizards. So that's just the remnants of what's left from legs. So they can kind of use those to help move along and help with mating as well for now.
As we have these two of our largest snakes out here right now, we can talk a little bit about the differences between them. So ball pythons, as a python, compared to the boas, those are two larger groups of snakes. And one of the differences between them is actually how they have young. So ball pythons here would lay eggs, and they're one of the few snakes that would actually provide a lot of care for those eggs. Many would lay eggs and just leave them, but ball pythons have been known to actually take care of the eggs. So they would wrap their whole bodies around their little nest of however many eggs that they have, and then they can, leave the area to go find some water and then get their bodies wet and then come back, and in doing so are able to adjust the moisture of the eggs, and they can kind of modify that as well and take very good care of their little babies. But in comparison, the boas, so like our Hog Island boas here, they actually they give birth to essentially live young. So they are still developing in eggs internally. But as they are born, they essentially hatch inside and then appear to be born just like a mammal. It doesn't look much different. So they come out as live little babies, which is, yeah, it's just a neat difference between the two types of snakes. Anything, Natalie, that you think we haven't touched on?
I don't think so. Do we have any other questions that we can look at? Has there ever been any conflict between the snakes? So we don't have them together unless we were wanting to breed them. They do live separately. Beth and I have 2 snakes out right now because we're both handling one each, so that we wouldn't let them get together other than for breeding. Somebody's asking if we have any sheds to show, and unfortunately we don't. We do have one snake who is opaque right now, so what will happen just before they shed, some liquid will kind of build up in between the 2 layers of skin, and they'll get this kind of milky light color, and that's kind of signaling to us that they're just about to shed. So we do leave them alone because they're a little bit more vulnerable at that time, so we like to give them their space just before they shed, and as long as they're in a nice warm, humid environment, then they will shed probably within a week or so. What breed is McFly? McFly is one of our eastern fox snakes, so one of the snakes that lives here in Ontario. All right, do you think...
So I think that's all we got here for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed having a sneak peek behind the scenes at some of our ambassador animals. We will eventually have to disturb David's nice little nap here, but thank you so much for hanging out with us. We hope to see you again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Wherever that will be. You'll have to wait and find out. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.